Elizabeth and her husband were on their way back from a trip to the city where his parents resided. Although her husband had a fondness for visiting them, the distance made it a rarity for the couple. As they made a brief stop at a gas station, Jacob ventured outside to settle the bill, leaving Elizabeth alone in the car. She gazed out of the window, her eyes tracing the slow descent of raindrops down the glass. Deep inside, a profound sadness enveloped her. 25 years had passed since they had first come together, yet recently, their relationship had taken a marked downturn. Elizabeth couldn't fathom the cause of this deterioration. In the past, their love had always seen them through difficult times, allowing them to navigate any challenge as a united front. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, something had fractured between them. Elizabeth reminisced about the person Jacob used to be: cheerful, kind, reliable, always willing to lend a helping hand. Now, before her, she saw a different man altogether, solemn, stern, and almost unrecognizable. She wondered if the shift had been triggered by her husband's career advancement. Jacob's promotion to a higher position had consumed a significant portion of his time, causing their family to fade into the background. Elizabeth harbored no resentment toward her husband's aspirations for a promotion that would secure their family's future. Deep within her heart, though, a persistent worry lingered. Strangely, the pursuit of wealth had not brought the same happiness they had once enjoyed when he was a junior manager. The one source of pure joy for Elizabeth remained the fact that she and Jacob had lovingly raised two remarkable daughters, Emily and Lily. Emily had already embarked on her college journey in a different state, while Lily had ventured overseas for an internship a few years back, ultimately marrying and now expecting her first child. Apart from her husband's increasingly distant demeanor, life couldn't have been more fulfilling for her daughter. Just as Jacob returned to the car, interrupting her reverie, he slammed the door shut, and they began their journey back home. Irritated by his abruptness, Elizabeth once again turned her gaze out of the window, lost in her thoughts. Throughout their married life, she had been a dedicated housewife, tending to the household, her husband, and the upbringing of their daughters. Jacob firmly believed that his wife should not work, taking sole responsibility for providing for their family. However, as their relationship had grown strained in recent times, Elizabeth found herself with little personal money. Whenever they went shopping, it was always her husband who footed the bill. The memory of the last time she bought something for herself had faded into obscurity. Her best friend, Hannah, persistently urged her to consider taking on at least a part-time job, but Jacob remained steadfast in his opposition. Elizabeth sensed that Jacob harbored a fear of straying from the comforts of home. He seemed apprehensive that if she were to work, the house might not be as tidy, and there might not be a delightful dinner waiting for him in the evening. She had often proposed that he could take on a small part-time job instead, allowing her to manage everything, but the outcome remained unaltered. Typically, her husband responded with anger, forbidding any further discussion on the matter. Now, guided by her memories and a growing sense of longing, Elizabeth decided to broach the topic once more. In a calm voice, she said, "Jacob, we need to talk. I understand you're not fond of the idea, but I have to consider going to work." Jacob retorted, his tone filled with frustration, "Are you bringing this up again? What's been going on with you at home? If you need money, just let me know how much, and I'll give it to you right away," Jacob snapped angrily. "I don't want to keep reminding you that I need to dress up too. I want the freedom to buy makeup or go to a cafe with my friends. I want to earn my own income," Elizabeth asserted firmly. "But I also don't want people saying that the wife of a successful man like me has a low-paying job. Who cares about that now?" "This isn't the time," Elizabeth tried to reason, but Jacob remained silent as he drove, signaling the end of the conversation. They completed the rest of the journey in silence. Upon arriving home, the argument flared up with renewed intensity. "Look, even your best friend's wife works as a saleswoman," Elizabeth pointed out. "Are you out of your mind? You don't appreciate anything," Jacob retorted. "Think about it. There are plenty of women who would love to be in your position. They all dream of staying at home and doing nothing. Are you saying I do nothing? Elizabeth countered. I've been running around this house like a horse all morning, picking up your socks, doing laundry, cooking, and dusting. I have an overwhelming amount of household responsibilities, and I'm tired of just being a housewife, Elizabeth voiced her frustrations. I miss socializing with people. Going to the store is a relief because I can have conversations with someone. I've told you everything. If you force me to stay at home, I'll seriously consider divorce. Please, let's drop this topic. I've had enough. Jacob shot his wife one final threatening look before exiting the dining room. Left to her own thoughts, Elizabeth couldn't help but question if her husband still loved her, if any remnants of their former feelings lingered. Their upcoming wedding anniversary only heightened her doubts. Elizabeth longed to celebrate the occasion at a restaurant, but Jacob had other plans. He believed it would be better and more convenient to invite family and friends to their home, without considering the immense effort Elizabeth would have to put into cooking for such a large gathering all day. His primary goal seemed to be showing off their house and highlighting Elizabeth's skills as a hostess. Elizabeth was weary of solitude and yearned for companionship. Elizabeth's best friend, Hannah, had relocated to another town, leading to infrequent meetings between them. Her husband's waning interest, along with her children having left home, left Elizabeth feeling increasingly isolated. Her only glimmer of hope lay in finding employment. As her anniversary approached, her daughters returned to celebrate. The eldest was accompanied by her husband, and the youngest by her boyfriend. For a few days, Elizabeth found solace in forgetting her loneliness. She engaged in cheerful conversations with her daughters in the kitchen as they prepared the festive meal. She listened attentively to the stories of their bustling lives, yet her daughters couldn't help but detect an underlying unease in their mother. They had harbored suspicions for some time that their parents' relationship had deteriorated, but upon arriving for the anniversary celebration, it became apparent that their concerns were justified. "Mom, what's going on between you and Dad?" Emily inquired with excitement. Elizabeth attempted to maintain her composure and replied softly, "What are you talking about, honey?" "Everything's fine." Emily persisted, "Are you sure? I sense that there's something you're not telling me. If you won't tell me, I'll speak to Dad." Elizabeth protested, but changing Emily's resolve was no easy task. She remained determined to address the situation with her father, firmly believing that her mother didn't deserve such treatment. Meanwhile, Jacob was keen to present himself as a caring husband, showing great reverence toward his daughters. He made a continuous effort to embrace his wife, lavishing her with compliments and even surprising her with a large bouquet of flowers. Elizabeth was overjoyed, believing that perhaps her husband had been influenced by his conversation with their daughter, and that everything would improve. However, as their daughters departed, Elizabeth's happiness dissolved into thin air. It became clear to her that it had all been a charade, and things would never be the same again. Jacob reverted to his usual demeanor, and the expression on his face did not bode well. "Why did you discuss our relationship with our daughters? Are you trying to turn them against me?" he angrily accused. "I didn't discuss anything," Elizabeth responded, her confusion evident. "Emily figured it out on her own, that we have issues. Never dare to say anything negative about me to them." "You always make me feel uncomfortable," Jacob retorted, his irritation apparent. Annoyed, Elizabeth watched as Jacob abruptly rose from the sofa and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. He didn't return until nightfall. The couple, locked in a heavy silence, retreated to their respective rooms. Elizabeth found herself unable to sleep, her mind consumed by thoughts of their uncertain future and the daunting prospect of living alone. The idea of divorce filled her with dread, as she had no clue what lay ahead. Despite the lingering emotions she held for Jacob, Elizabeth resolved to make one final attempt at restoring some semblance of peace between them. However, her efforts were met with only more aggression from Jacob, who gradually distanced himself, eventually even avoiding coming home altogether. Elizabeth sank deeper into the abyss of solitude. One fateful day, while out shopping, Elizabeth eavesdropped on a conversation between two cashiers that would profoundly alter the course of her life. One of the women mentioned that a friend had recently opened a new hotel downtown and was in need of housekeepers. In that moment, it dawned on Elizabeth that this might be her chance to take control of her life. She shyly apologized for overhearing their conversation, explained that she was actively seeking employment, and politely requested the hotel manager's contact information. Graciously, the cashier provided her with the number. With a racing heart and a sense of disbelief, Elizabeth stepped out onto the bustling street, realizing she was taking a step against her husband's wishes. To avoid unnecessary conflict, Elizabeth made the difficult decision not to inform her husband. The very idea of deceit weighed heavily on her conscience, but she saw no alternative. Determined not to waver, she promptly made a call from her car, scheduling a meeting at the hotel for the following day to discuss her employment prospects. After concluding the call, Elizabeth lingered for a moment, a happy smile gracing her face. Emotions overwhelmed her. Finally, something was about to change in her life. The next morning, she braced herself for the possibility of her plans falling apart. However, her new boss, Gabriella, turned out to be a wonderful woman, dispelling Elizabeth's fears. Gabriella meticulously explained the job's details, the compensation, and the guest interaction guidelines. Elizabeth nodded eagerly, ready to dive into her new role. Initially challenging and unfamiliar, the work eventually became manageable, allowing her to maintain the house as she had envisioned. Keeping the secret proved simple, as her husband paid little attention to her, oblivious to any shifts in her behavior or demeanor. During this time, Elizabeth's spirits soared. She relished her life to the fullest, reveling in her work, enjoying her weekly paychecks, and appreciating her wonderful colleagues. Several blissful months slipped by, and Elizabeth found herself so content that even her husband's discourteous behavior failed to dampen her mood. One weekend, as her husband departed on yet another business trip, Elizabeth decided to indulge in a day for herself, including a shopping excursion and the preparation of a delectable meal. However, upon returning from her shopping trip, her boss asked her to cover for a colleague who had fallen ill. Elizabeth saw no issue and readily agreed to help. Soon afterward, Elizabeth received a complaint from one of the rooms she was responsible for. Guests had raised concerns about dust in the room and a depleted minibar. Swiftly, Elizabeth rushed to address the issues. Upon entering the room, she found it empty, the only sound being the flow of running water. She set to work, tidying up and making the bed. As she completed her tasks, she was surprised to encounter a young woman in her 20s, with damp hair and draped in a towel. The woman appeared perturbed, expressing her displeasure and insisting on being treated like any other guest. Elizabeth listened in silence, offering a polite smile as the young woman continued to speak. However, a voice emerged from the bathroom, a voice Elizabeth would recognize among 1,000 others. "Honey, don't be rude to the staff. I think they all understand." "Elizabeth? What are you doing here?" Jacob's voice trailed off, and he froze in place, clearly taken aback. "Hello, my darling. How was your business trip?" Elizabeth responded with a touch of sarcasm, though she fought back tears, refusing to display vulnerability in front of this man who was unworthy of her tears. Jacob appeared visibly shocked. He had never anticipated encountering Elizabeth in such a situation. His feeble explanation was that the young woman was his colleague. "Do you shower with all your colleagues?" Elizabeth quipped. Upon seeing her husband in his bathrobe with wet hair, Jacob attempted to reach for her arm, but Elizabeth pulled away, tossed a towel in his direction, and exited the room. The young mistress watched with an expression of displeasure as her lover's futile attempts to retain his wife failed. Elizabeth swiftly dressed, letting Jacob know exactly what she thought of him, and then stormed out of the room. Jacob, seething with anger and cursing under his breath, made no effort to chase after her. His focus had narrowed to the situation with Elizabeth, and her unexpected behavior left him bewildered and incensed. Elizabeth headed straight for her boss's office and, after recounting the entire ordeal, requested permission to leave. Gabriella, a woman known for her tact and empathy, granted Elizabeth a few days off without hesitation. Back at home, a storm of conflict awaited Elizabeth. Jacob, well aware that the best defense is often a strong offense, played on his extreme dissatisfaction, accusing Elizabeth of deceit and going against his wishes. In response, Elizabeth, her rage eerily calm, confronted her husband with allegations of adultery with a woman younger than their own daughter. "Jacob, we're getting a divorce," he shouted angrily. "I'll be just fine, you'll see." Jacob attempted to appeal to Elizabeth's reason, even promising to work on improving their relationship. He couldn't fathom the idea of his wife leaving him and nearly begged her, insisting he needed no one but her. Nevertheless, Elizabeth remained resolute. In the end, the couple proceeded with their divorce, unable to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. They exchanged their jointly built house, once envisioned as a comfortable family abode, with the hope that it would become a new beginning for both of them. Elizabeth found herself a separate apartment, determined to distance herself from Jacob. Although Jacob made attempts to reconcile with his ex-wife on occasion, Elizabeth couldn't bear to even see him, let alone engage in conversation. It eventually dawned on him that he would never find a better partner, but by then, it was too late. At times, Elizabeth would share her concerns over the phone with her friend Hannah, who had relocated to another city several years earlier. Hannah consistently offered her support, and one day, she hatched a brilliant idea. While in her city, Hannah unexpectedly bumped into her old classmate Leo, who had recently gone through a divorce himself. She believed that reuniting Elizabeth and Leo was the perfect solution. They had been close friends in their youth but had drifted apart over the years. Hannah invited Leo to visit, and since Elizabeth was on vacation at the time, she agreed. Hannah ensured that her friend had a full and engaging schedule, and one day, she orchestrated a meeting between Elizabeth and Leo. At first glance, Elizabeth didn't immediately recognize this handsome, upbeat individual as her childhood friend. They swiftly rekindled their connection, and Elizabeth couldn't help but notice that Leo's age suited him remarkably well, and his soul remained unchanged over the years. Before long, both Elizabeth and Leo began to realize a strong attraction forming between them. In their youth, Leo had been deeply in love with her and had even contemplated confessing his feelings. However, upon learning of her impending marriage, he had decided to disappear from her life. Now, a quarter of a century later, he saw a new opportunity to win the heart of this captivating woman. Initially, Elizabeth was hesitant to reciprocate Leo's feelings. After a brief visit, she departed, but thoughts of him continued to occupy her mind. She found herself torn, feeling both regretful that she hadn't stayed with Leo and ashamed that she had moved on so quickly from her separation with her husband, fearing the judgment of her daughters and friends. Elizabeth's daughters stood firmly by her side, counseling her to disregard the opinions of others and to prioritize her own happiness. Meanwhile, Leo persisted in his pursuit. He visited Elizabeth, determined to persuade her to grant him a chance. Unable to resist his heartfelt appeal, Elizabeth acquiesced, a decision she would never come to regret. In Leo, she found herself cherished and adored once more, and her feelings for him were just as passionate. In due course, they tied the knot, choosing to invite only their closest friends to celebrate their union. Elizabeth was elated to have found a man with whom she was eager to traverse the journey of life.